Hi, welcome back to Introduction to Philosophy. My name's Tom, and today we are going to be talking about what philosophy is a little bit more by looking at Plato and Socrates, looking at specifically the Apology, which is Socrates' apology before he's put to death. I think in our book it's called Socratic Wisdom, and Plato's Allegory of the Cave. So first, a historical point. Part of the reason why we read these at the outset is because Plato really marks, and Socrates mark the beginning of philosophy in the Western tradition. There are philosophers, ancient Greek philosophers before them, but they're kind of referred to as pre-Socratics. To reference the Socrates is kind of like the important mark here. Socrates never wrote anything. He lived kind of a nomadic existence. He is a historical person, and he was the teacher of Plato. Plato wrote all the Platonic dialogues, and he used Socrates as his main protagonist in all of his works. Now, when it comes to the Apology, it is largely regarded as historically accurate, more of a report on what was going on and what Socrates was saying. Um, Later on, Socrates really is more just Plato's protagonist. And so, by the time he talks about when we get to the allegory of the cave, Plato has more of his own ideas that he's really um, advancing and just kind of using Socrates as his main character, right, in his dialogues. So, looking at both of these, I want to kind of have more of a bird's eye view and think about the question of what is philosophy according to Socrates, according to Plato. As I mentioned, Socrates had kind of a nomadic existence, and he was something of the, what would you say, idealized truth seeker, right? He had no job or anything. He just kind of wandered around and asked people questions about what is justice, what is truth, and he claims to have been set on this journey by an oracle that told him that he was the wisest, and he claims that he's not wise, and so he goes around and asks people questions and sees in search of a wise person. Um, Now, he has some interesting things to say about the charges against him. He's got three charges, particularly the charge about corrupting the youth. He has an interesting argument about. He has an interesting argument about um, not being afraid to die because he doesn't really know what's going to happen. So why should he fear what he doesn't know? And he refutes the idea that he's doesn't believe in the gods, and but overall, I think the question I want to pose is whether or not what Socrates is doing is good, right? Overall. Um, on the one hand, you might think he is, something of a hero, a philosophical hero. He's seeking truth and he doesn't care what stands in his way, and he's willing to face death in order to seek the truth and know what's right. On the other hand, you might think, well, you made enough people mad that they're going to make you drink poison and kill you. So maybe you're not doing such a great job here, right? And the overall idea that he, you might think he has a kind of false humility to him, right? This idea that, oh, I'm not wise, I must find someone who's wiser. And then as he talks to everyone, he kind of dismisses their views as not being adequate. Um, it's an interesting question here about what is the role of philosophy. Is he really doing philosophy in the right sort of way? And another thing to think about is the fact that philosophy is largely not done that way anymore. Um, for good or for bad, it's much more of an academic, institutionalized pursuit. And you might think that that's better, you might think that that's worse, but it is a open question. Just because we're in a philosophy class and reading kind of classical philosophy texts does not necessarily mean that that's the best way to advance your thinking and your reasoning and your questioning and trying to reach some kind of sense of what the meaning of life is. So I would ask you to read the Apology. I'm not going to give any answers here, but read it with an open mind and kind of in a critical mind. What of Socrates' opinion and overall position do you think is right? What of it do you think is maybe wrong or is wanting? Um, Turning to the allegory of the cave, Plato paints this picture. It's a really famous picture of, not literally paints, but in the way he writes, of a scenario in which all these people are in a cave and they're kind of locked down there, and they can only see shadows on the wall, and this is all they know. And so they treat those shadows as, actual objects. And one of them escapes and sees that there's a fire behind them and that there's actually puppets making these shadows, and escapes out of the cave and gets to the sunlight and is able to see everything, and then sees that that's the real world and comes back into the cave, tells his or her fellow prisoners about it, and they don't believe him. And this is supposed to be a kind of giant metaphor for what philosophy is. And I think the standard interpretation is that getting out of the cave and seeing the world is seeing the real world, right? Seeing the truth. And for Plato, getting the journey to get out of that cave is a journey of doing philosophy. And for him, what we see and hear and are aware of in a kind of immediate fashion in our day-to-day lives is falls short of being truth, right? And we need to do real, rigorous philosophical work to get to a place where we know the truth, right? So, on the one hand, again, someone might think that this is a great story here and that that's what we're doing, right? You need to really search for the meaning of life. You need to search for truth. It's not right there in front of you. And you need to think hard and kind of get to a place where you can see past, what you see immediately, the day-to-day, the kind of humdrum and of daily life and all the other things that we kind of get caught up with, and find like the real genuine truth out there. On the other hand, you might think that what he's giving us is kind of something of a recipe for disaster, right? And I ask in the discussion forum whether or not Plato is a conspiracy theorist. So here's the bad side of Plato's allegory here. It provides a kind of structure, right, where you don't believe the here and now, right? And you think the truth is out there beyond everything that we experience. And to boot, if you do find the truth, you're also baked into Plato's story as the idea that no one would believe you and people won't recognize you telling them the truth when you do have the truth. This you might think is a recipe for disaster, right? Where, you're never going to believe, your immediate experience of the here and now, facts right in front of your face, and that you're always going to be searching for something beyond them, and that if you do find the truth, no one's going to believe you, right? So again, with this, we're just delving into this idea of what philosophy is, and what it is to have something like a worldview, an idea of what truth is, what right is, um, you know, um, how to understand ourselves ethically, epistemologically, metaphysically in the world. And so, with the allegory of the cave, I again, implore you to look at the benefits and look at the drawbacks of this story, right? And that notice that Plato's making a significant commitment in kind of giving us this allegory. It's not just, a story. It really, mm, it's a substantial position here, right? And so it should give us a little something to go on to start thinking about what philosophy is, what the purpose of philosophy is, how does our worldview really affect, how we look at metaphysics and epistemology and all these different subtopics that we will get into. So that's it for now. I look forward to talking with you all more on the discussion forum. All right.